So hi there. Let's take a real quick look visually at what I mean by the text above, where I would create a query. So to demonstrate this, then obviously we're talking about a database. So I'm going to use every RackForms user gets a database table from the default install called fbdemo. And in this case, I've got some data in there. And although this isn't a serial number, we have something that is essentially unique in this system, which is an age. And I say essentially unique because there are a few duplicates in here, but that's not so much important. What is important is that we're going to query a database for a specific value. And in this case, it'll be age, but it could just as easily be serial numbers. So this is a database table that we use for the example. And what we'll say is, I'm going to be 35 in a couple weeks here, so I'm just going to put 35. So that's a unique number. So we'll say that we'll query for me, and then we'll look for somebody that's 35 years old. So how would I do that? Okay, so I would definitely use, I personally would break this into 2 pages. That's not to say that we have to do it this way, but personally I would much rather have the user fill out one piece of information that is just a serial number than fill out an entire form, and then when they hit submit, it turns out that it's already been submitted. That would really annoy me. So I would personally collect the serial number first. So we'll say, in this case, I'll say enter serial number. All right, so this would be the first page of the form, and I'll just put a simple text field here, and I'll just put like number in front of that, and then I'll hit submit. The second page of the job, then I'm going to add a second form page, and then at the very top of this page, I'm going to run then the query module, and this is of course what I talk about in the post. So first let me name this field just so it makes sense. So I'll just call this serial. And basically in RackForms, I should say that every field can get a unique identifier. And in fact, we encourage this. This helps us keep track of things. And so, okay, so we've got a form then. We go to page 1 and we're going to click submit, and then we go to the second page of the form. The second page then, I'm going to then write a custom query. So I'm going to select count star from fbdemo where, and in this case, remember, we're using age, but this would be serial, equals question mark. So what are we doing here? Well, we're essentially saying select all of the records that have the age that we're going to put in this form, right? So in this case, it's going to be 35, and I'll type in a couple different ones to show you. But we're going to say select count. Select count basically means, here, I'll actually just run this in the database first. Just show you what this looks like. So let me go to SQL here, pop this in, and go to RackForms. And so we'll say 35. So select count from fbdemo. Oops, I better put a where in there, where age equals 35. So I run this, and I get something that looks like this. So I get this count query. And we can use something called aliases. So I'm going to say select count as CT. So that means our column name is going to be CT. So I'll run this, and we get CT. And by the way, I should say that if you do get RackForms and you ever need direct help, just shoot me an email and we'll meet on Skype, and I can actually just walk you through this. That goes for anybody that happens to be watching this. That's just part of standard support. It's just free. It's what I do. But also that you could just essentially copy this verbatim here, but instead of, you would change your table name probably, and then instead of saying age, you would say we're serial number, right? So you can use this exactly as I'm doing it right here. So you can take this as a job demonstration video. But anyway, so that's what it looks like. So CT, we get a 1. If we look at our data set here again, I'll change me back to 34. Now we have 2 records, Ted Stanton and me, that have age 34. So now when I run this query, we're going to get a CT equals 2, right? Whoops. Change that to 34. Now we're going to get CT2. That's actually probably a good thing that just happened, because then obviously the other thing is, well, what about a fail state? What if the age doesn't exist? So 1001 does not exist in the database. So if we do that, we get a 0, right? So we're just saying, look, how many records have this particular value that matches? 1, 2, 3, 0, etc. And of course, this is what we're looking for. If we get a 0 in this, then we want to say we can't complete the form. Now, here's what we do. In RackForms, this is really important to note, and I realize I'm cramming a lot in quickly here, but this is really important. RackForms is all about security. So when we have a query that we run against a database, we always want to use what are called prepared statements. And what prepared statements mean is that instead of putting direct values in, as I was here, we're actually going to use placeholders. So a placeholder is simply a question mark. And this is what RackForms uses, but you'll notice this also works in all databases. In other words, this is a universal format. This isn't just a RackForms thing. This is a universal format. And by that I mean, when a question mark sits here, that means, hey, instead of just running this query, let me drag this window in here, and using a direct value, we're actually going to ask to edit our parameters first. And in this case, our param1 is, well, the age. And so if I type in 34, we're going to get the same response that we had before. It's just that now we're being asked for it. And that's how RackForms works. RackForms never, ever uses straight, let me just copy this query over. It never uses just straight values. We always use prepared statements. And so in this case, when I ran this query, we got asked for a value, right? RackForms does that in this area right here. So we put in our query right here and we got a question mark. And that means, hey, we've got a variable. We say what the value of the variable is in this variables block right here. And all we have to do is just click this little dynamic variable button right here. And then we're going to get a list of form fields. And then I look at this, and of course, this is the serial number field. Remember how I named this guy serial? I'll just click this, and you'll notice now that this box right here is going to get populated with what we call a token. A token is another really important RackForms concept, which is basically how we refer to elements in our form in a simplified manner. So in this case, our token is this F, right? And we got two braces. If we look at our tooltip here, F means form field. However, there are other ways that we can save data in a PHP web form, and that includes session, post, get, and raw PHP variables. In this case, though, we just want the form field. And hopefully that letter makes sense, of course, too. It's a form field, so we use F. Session uses S, post uses P, etc. So yeah, but again, we don't really have to know the program behind it. We just use the dynamic variable picker. So anyway, so that's what we get. So we go into this form, and I'll promise to finish up quickly here. We go into this form, and now we're going to do a select count where age equals the value that we put in this box. Now we're going to take a look. We're going to set our SQL debug mode to data dump, and then we're going to run our form and see what we get. So I'm going to put in my 34, same value that I used before, and I'm going to hit submit. And now you'll notice that I get this back right here. So whenever we query a database in RackForms, we essentially are saying return an array of results back to us. In this case, I put a value that returns results, so I get this CT equals 2. If I put in an age, once again, that doesn't make sense, we get this. We get a variable called fbQuery, and that has a record, which is this right here, and then it has basically two aliases for that record. CT, which is, by the way, what we're calling it here, select count as CT. So we're actually returning that right here, CT, and then we also return index for it too. And I know this is a bit much right now, but let's take a look at how this actually works in practice. Like, in other words, how do we use this? So what I do is, in the query module then, this guy right here, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And there's something called code to run after query. And there's a little hint down right here that says all select result sets as in, and it shows us this is how we're going to get it. So what I can do is I can actually say echo, which is like a PHP way of saying print this out, and then I can put in this fbQuery and then CT. I'll explain what this format means in just a second, but this is what this looks like. Let me turn off debug here, and then we'll run the form and see what happens. So I get a 0 up there. If I put in 34, a legitimate value, I'm going to get 2 up there. Right, so that's how we actually access our value. Before we printed out what the result looks like, here we're actually accessing the value. And so now, if we want to take this to conclusion, this fbQuery 0 means this is the first row in the database. This is important because we're only returning one row. We're just returning a count. It doesn't matter if there's 1,000 records in the database or 0. It's always going to be the first row of that result set. Okay, and again, we got that little tooltip right here to show us how this works. And then CT is the name of the column that we want to return. So what we could say then is we could say if fbQuery CT equals 0, or actually in this case we'd say not equals 0. We'll add some code. Then in this case just says die. And we'll say record already exists. So we're using raw code here, and this is really important because, again, in RackForms we can add custom code whenever we want, but because this is such a specific requirement, seeing if something exists in the database where it could be any value, the field could be any field, and the table could be any field, it's really hard for me as a developer to create a feature that would do that. It's just too specific. But that's why, of course, you have me as help, but also why we have the ability to add custom code. And so in this case, I'm basically saying if this result right here is not equal to 0, we're going to die. Die is we basically stop the page execution and we print out a message. So how does that look? Well, I'm going to say 34 and submit, and now we die and we say record already exists. Now just to really drive this home, let's actually add a few form fields right here, right? So we got that. I hit submit, record already exists, right? The user cannot do anything more. And of course we could expand this message so it makes more sense. Add some links, say, thank you for submitting, but this already exists. Click here to do something else. But of course if we enter a value that doesn't exist, 1001, and I hit submit, now we get our standard form, right? We no longer die in this logic. We now see the rest of the form, right? And so to our user then, we'd have no idea that just happened. So that's just one way of doing it. Right? There's other ways of doing that too. I, again, personally would prefer doing this where we enter the serial number first before we force the user to enter a bunch of information. Now, maybe there's different application requirements. Maybe the company wants to capture the user's information, even if there is a fail state. I don't know why, but could possibly be. But this is how I like to do it. As a user, I would feel much better about the brand that I was working with if they were kind of nice to me about it. But again, one way of doing it. The other possible ways that we could do it is we could use an AJAX query. So I'm not going to take a look at that here because that wouldn't be as appropriate, but just as an example, we could run an AJAX query which basically says on the fly, perform a lookup and see how many records are returned here. It'd be a little bit more involved, but second way of doing that. Oh, and I should say that we could also possibly do for this text field right here, we could also possibly do an auto-suggest field too. So auto-suggest field basically says run some query on the database. And that comes from this right here, from this data source here. We'd actually run some kind of query on the database, and then we would actually look up values in real time. And if there's 0 records, then we could do some logic there too. So again, I don't want to confuse the issue, but lots and lots of different ways of doing things in RackForms, and that's by design. We're professionals. We need many ways of doing things. So hopefully this video helps. Sorry for the length, but again, if you do go with RackForms, you can literally just copy and paste the code that you've seen here, and your job will just work if you use this format. And again, if you don't want to use this code, contact me, and I'd be happy to help discuss other options. So yeah, there you have it.